once upon a time when I was very young, and this goes back a lot of years, I joined the military. I was working as what's called an airborne electronic sensor operator, and that was in the wonderful world of Sea King helicopters. So anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue. So you've ever seen those films where the helicopter comes in and it goes to a hover, and they put some dummy in the end of the wire, and they lower him down into the water to get somebody? Well, I was the dummy on the end of the wire. That's where I started in the military. And then after that, I sort of went into the radar, anti-submarine warfare, electronic warfare, and all that, and eventually moved into the intelligence branch. But yeah, I sort of started out as the dummy at the end of the wire, and it's quite an interesting experience to be 400 miles south of Iceland in 3 o'clock in the morning doing that kind of work. It gives you kind of a whole other view of the world. And might note that those engines were powered by unicorns. Yeah, that's it. They're powered by fossil fuels. That's what. Yeah. So, just a quick thought on what's on the screen here. What actually drove me to go from being a former intelligence guy, a guy that did a lot of research into extremism, and I decided to move into the public sphere a few years ago. What actually drove me to this was the issue of free speech. I've worked in a number of countries where they don't have quite so much free speech, like Singapore, and I've worked in countries where they have like no free speech, like Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, Albania, Belarus, Russia, those sorts of places. And what I was really stunned by as a Canadian, as an intelligence guy, as an ex-police contractor, and as an ex-military guy, was what I saw, the tone, the language, the ideas that were being used in places like Bosnia and Croatia are now starting to show up in places like Canada. And I was really shocked because I grew up as Canadian, you know, Constitution, Charter, freedom, human rights, all this sort of stuff. And only now I discover this is kind of starting to disappear, which is really shocking. And I make the observation that free speech may be your most important right. As individuals, you would think your most important right is the right to stay alive, the right not to be murdered arbitrarily, the right not to be thrown in jail arbitrarily. A lot of people argue that's their most important right. But as much as that's true to an individual, as a society, as a group, our most important right is free speech. Because when we lose free speech, everything else will fail behind that. It's a matter of time before all your other rights disappear. So that's kind of why I got into doing what I'm doing. That's why we got the podcast started. That's why we're having a lot of fun around the world. And interesting enough, we have as many followers outside of Canada as we do inside of Canada, because a lot of people around the world are really starting to pay attention to this more than Canadians are. But anyway, so what are we doing right now? I'm going to talk about a few things tonight just to give you a rough idea where we're going. What is political Islam? What is this terrorism that's going on? What's the problem? We'll talk about that. And then what are the effects of political Islam in Canada? And we saw that today when Mr. Scheer decided that Salim Mansour isn't allowed to be a candidate. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about something called this Red-Green Alliance. I'm going to get back to the free speech thing. And then, as much as a lot of what I talk about is pessimistic and bad, the reality is there is hope out there. There's hope on the horizon. There are places where good things are happening, or at least good things are starting to happen. And that's very good news. We're hoping to get a lot of this out between now and the election. And then I talk a bit about Operation Killswitch, is one of the things, the projects I'm involved in right now, and why it's important to a lot of folks. Now, one of the questions that comes up all the time when I do this sort of stuff is people ask me, what the heck is going on? Bombs going off in Paris, people getting slaughtered in large numbers in Nice, France. The attack in Sri Lanka, which just murdered a bunch of Christians who were specifically targeted for being Christians. There was the attack in Edmonton, the attack in the Parliament in Ottawa. There was the attack in Manchester at the Ariana Grande concert, where a bunch of 14 to 18-year-old girls got slaughtered. There's been multiple terrorist attacks in London, Berlin, in Spain, in just all over the place. And folks are actually asking, what the heck is going on? What's behind all of this? Well, there is something behind this. It's reasonably easy to understand if you look at it. So here we have the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So let's look at Islam for a moment. Islam exists. It's a religion. It's a faith. It's been there for a long time, since the year, basically 600 sort of a thing. But it's got problems right now. And basically, you could break Islam right now down into two large groups of people. So from the center, kind of going over here, we've got a bunch of Muslims who want to push the faith forward into the future. They want to modernize it. They want to humanize it. They want to incorporate technology, human rights, new thinking, new ideas. And they want the faith of Islam to become a modern, positive force. And there's a bunch of them out there. Here in Canada, we've got Rahil Reza, we've got the Muslim Reform Movement, we've got Muslims Facing Tomorrow. And then kind of from here over to here, we've got the other group. And they want to take Islam as a faith and turn it into Islam as a political system. Literally, they want this to become a political ideology under the name of a religion. And not only that, they want to take that political ideology and drive it down onto everyone else. It is a supremacist force. And by supremacist, I mean an idea that exists where they believe only their idea is valid and everything else has to be extinguished. So it's a rather dangerous, difficult kind of thing to understand, but nonetheless, there it is. It's out there. Now, the other thing that's worth kind of wrapping your mind around is we live in the West, we live in Canada, we're kind of part of that whole G7, G20, G8, European, North American kind of scene. So when we hear about terrorism, we hear about Islamic terrorism, we hear usually that it's Europeans, Christians, or whatever that are victims of the terrorism. And that's true, it's there, it's a really bad thing. But it's also worth remembering that the 10 countries in the world which have the worst terrorist problem measured by the number of people that keep getting killed by terrorists, the top 10 countries in the world are all Muslim majority countries, and the people getting killed mostly are Muslims. Now this is interesting. So what's happening there is you've got this gang over here that kind of wants to modernize and move ahead, but they're a threat because they understand Islam. They've read a lot of the ideology. They understand how it works. These guys over here, the folks that want to turn it into a political force and they're willing to use violence to get it, the people they hate the worst are these guys over here. So in Muslim majority countries, they're having this fight between who's going to get to determine the soul of Islam, the future of Islam. What we're seeing in the West is kind of collateral damage. It's a spillover effect. As political Islam moves into our countries, now we're starting to see the same sort of violent problem. So that's kind of partly what political Islam is about. I'm going to explain that a little more later. But that's a large part of what we're seeing is this struggle between two forces within Islam, and we're kind of the collateral damage, if you will. Now, should you care about political Islam? And my answer to you would be yes, it's a problem. It's here in Canada. It's having an effect on the way we live, on the way we tax ourselves, and a whole bunch of other stuff. The first problem is what we loosely call political entryism. And by that, I mean a group of people who join a political party, not because they believe in the ideology or they like the leader or they think it's a fun group or something. They actually join that party with the idea of infiltrating it, taking it over, and then moving it in an entirely different direction. So right now, the party with the biggest problem, and I'm not picking on the Liberals when I say this, but the party with the biggest problem is the Liberals. They actually have sitting members of Parliament who are Islamist in orientation. So when you wonder where did the M103 Anti-Islamophobia Act came from, it came from a political liberal whose father is a hardcore Islamist, and she herself, Rika Khalid, comes from the ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. So political entryism is real. Now, Tahir Gora, one of my friends in Mississauga, wrote an article back in 2014, and he warned Canadians, and he said the 2015 election would see the first surge of members of the Muslim Brotherhood and members of Jamaat Islamiyah working their way into the political system, and lo and behold, he was right. It's happening. Now, again, just let me say, not picking on the Liberals here, because the Conservatives and the NDP have the exact same problem, just to a lesser degree. Now, we also have terrorism fundraising going on here in Canada. Some of you may know about the conflict in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. Well, tens of millions of dollars of money from Canada has gone to help support the terrorism there, and that's a real problem. We've also had official fundraising for terrorism here. There was something called IRFAN, the International Relief Fund for the Afflicted and Needy. It was a federally registered, taxpayer-supported charity which was busted by the CRA, by the Canada Revenue Agency, for funding terrorism, in this case Hamas, and in this case some $35 million worth of goods and services. So good to know that Canadian taxpayers are out there making a difference in the world by buying stuff for terrorists so they can blow stuff up. And it's going on right now. There's a number of significant problems. Another one is Trudeau and the Islamist cause. Trudeau himself, and I mentioned to some of you folks earlier, has been a member of Parliament since 2008. And of course, he's been Prime Minister for the last 3 years. During that entire time period, since becoming an MP up till like now, Every time he's been going down a path and he's had to either sort of go for Canadian values, the Constitution, Canadian interests, or if he's been forced to look at Islamist values or Islamist interests, he's gone down the path for the Islamists. And for evidence, I would point out, like, as soon as he was elected Prime Minister, we withdrew our military forces from bombing ISIS. ISIS was committing literal genocide twice. We're supposed to be a country that's like never again, no more genocide, but he pulled out of there. Prime Minister Trudeau told us we should bring ISIS fighters back to Canada because they're going to be a powerful voice for de-radicalization for the program we don't actually have, but whatever. He told us that if you're opposed to Islamist fighters coming back to Canada, it's you that has the problem because you're Islamophobic. And I kind of look at this and say, hey, you know what? I've been to a war. I see what these kind of folks do when they get going, and I'm afraid of these guys. It's not because I'm afraid of Islam. It's because I'm afraid of what they do. But anyway, it's also worth noting, I mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood a bit. We'll talk about it a bit more. They are here in Canada in a structured, organized, regular kind of way. And it has been testified to in the Senate of Canada by some of the world's experts on this stuff, that the Muslim Brotherhood has between 8 and 10 regular, structured, organized, well-financed organizations here in Canada. The 4 that were mentioned specifically in testimony were Islamic Relief Canada, the National Council for Canadian Muslims, the Muslim Association of Canada, and IRFAN, the outfit that I mentioned was funding terrorism, which is now defunct, they're gone. But nonetheless, we have Muslim Brotherhood front groups operating in Ottawa and across the country, including here in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC, running things like schools, mosques, and cultural centers. So political Islam in Canada is an issue, it exists, and it is having an effect on us. Now, I've talked a bit about the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's like, who the heck are these guys? What is this about? It's kind of a weird sounding organization, but way back in 1928, a guy by the name of Hassan al-Banna decided he was going to form a new social, political, religious group. He called it the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Ikhwani, the brothers. And it's been rather successful. It operates openly in Egypt. They formed the government there for a while. It operates a lot now in Turkey, Qatar, Libya, Tunisia, etc., throughout the Middle East. More interestingly, though, and especially to us, it operates in the West. And overall, outside of the Middle East and inside the Middle East, it operates in about 81 or 82 different countries. And by operating, I mean structured presence, organization, charities, schools, universities, mosques, all that sort of stuff. Not just some guy in a house, but an actual large organization. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is political in orientation. It believes in political Islam. So when I talk about the 2 groups of Islam, these are the ones over here. These are like the bad guys. Now, in case you sort of wonder what they're about, Hassan al-Banna was kind enough to tell us. And he says, the nature of Islam is to dominate, not to be dominated. To impose its law on all nations, and to extend its power to the entire planet. And when you read that initially, you kind of think, this is a little bit pinky in the brain. This is kind of like Dr. Evil. Like some guy sitting in Egypt says, you know, I'm going to take over the world. But what he's actually done, he's built an organization that controls governments, controls members of parliament, and is effectively operating in 80 different countries, and it's actually a threat. It's causing a problem. We'll talk a bit more about that later as well. In case there was any doubt what these guys on are about, they actually have a motto. So when you see people like President Morsi of Egypt, when he was running Egypt, he would actually stand up and start every political meeting as president by chanting this. Allah is our objective. The Quran is the Constitution. The Prophet Muhammad is our leader. Jihad is our way. And dying for the sake of Allah is the highest of our aspirations. So one of the things that's cool about this is they're actually very clear about what they want. They're clear about where they're going. So the state of denial of our politicians is absolutely amazing when they say, well, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood are the moderate group. They're not Al-Qaeda. They're not ISIS. And it's like, read their own literature. Listen to what they're doing. They are quite a significant group. Now, let's bring this back around to a question I get a lot. People ask me, you know, do you think Trudeau has converted to Islam? And I say, no, I don't think he has. Nor do I think the rest of them have. But then people ask me, well, why does he cooperate them with so much if he hasn't? And I thought, well, that's actually a good question. Why do we see a number of governments, and it's not just Trudeau, by the way, it was President Obama, it was Prime Minister May to a certain degree, it was the former President of France, it was the Chancellor of Germany, etc., etc. A lot of them are cooperating with these groups, and people ask, like, why would they cooperate with these guys when these guys are opposed to everything we stand for? And there's actually answers to this. It's kind of interesting. So, there is what we call the Red-Green Alliance. Red meaning loosely socialist, communist, Marxist, cultural Marxist, those kind of folk, and green mean political Islam. So there is sort of a socialist, Islamist, and alliance. And a lot of socialists and a lot of other folks just say, why would socialism cooperate with religion? And there's an answer to this. Both of them are collectivist. They believe in a strong, central, superior authority. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in individual human rights. They don't like the idea of individual agency, that an individual or a group of individuals can change part of society. They're against all of that. They're in favor of the central government controlling everything. So you see in Canada, increasingly, governments are reaching into your home, they're reaching into your library, they're reaching into your computer, they're reaching into your car, they're reaching into your school. And they want to control more and more and more of your life. Well, strong collectivist central governments love that kind of stuff. So the socialist, communist kind of group and the Islamist kind of group actually have a lot in common there. The other thing is they also dislike much of the same stuff. They dislike borders, they dislike sovereignty, and they dislike nationalism. They don't think Canada should be able to make a lot of their own decisions. We should make decisions combined with other countries, etc., etc. So they have a lot in common, so therefore they can share a lot together. And this is why they tend to run together rather well. Now, one of the things that's worth kind of looking at as we look at this upcoming election, as we look at Europe, as we look at the European Union, as we look at Brexit, etc., we see that the world used to be kind of driven by a left-right tension. So you kind of had the dippers and the liberals over here, and we kind of had the conservative and reform party over there, and the tension between those drove our society. So some governments were more in favor of social welfare, some were more in favor of cutting debt, and they'd go back and forth, and that kind of drove us ahead. Now, however, the difference in a lot of cases is not the sort of a left-right distance. It is the distance between the globalists and the sovereigntists. So we have globalists like Mr. Trudeau, like Mr. Soros, like Jean-Claude Juncker, the current president of France, the current chancellor of Germany, and they believe in a globalist, supranationalist kind of way where the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, etc., should largely be the determining force in what happens in your life. And then we have the other folks, the folks who believe in sovereignty, that Canada should be able to decide whether we open our border or close our border. We should be able to decide whether we import this or export that. We should be able to have to decide what our law says or what our law doesn't say. And we should be able to establish these rules for ourselves. And we support other countries to do the same thing. We think the Americans should be able to do their thing, the Brits should be able to do their thing, the Singaporeans should do their thing. But increasingly we're seeing this tension. So with this election, not just here in Canada, both the elections in Europe, what I'm seeing with a lot of folks, and you see this everywhere, folks are looking about saying, where do I want to vote? What do I want to do? Who do I want to support? So they look at what's on offer. They look at the menu and they say, well, there's Party A, Party B, and Party C. And there's Leader A, and Leader B, and Leader C. And I don't hear anything I like from any of them. I don't hear anything sensible. And one of the reasons that's happening is we have a bunch of leaders who are trained to sit on the fence, and they're sort of working in kind of a globalist UN kind of world. But most of the citizens like us around us more tend to think in kind of a sovereignty, Canadian nationalism, Canadian values kind of world. So a lot of folks are frustrated because they just don't see anything on offer they want. And it's not just Canada, it's Germany, it's the United Kingdom. That's why Brexit was successful. And we're going to see a lot more struggle, I think, because of that. Because the political parties are still trying to run the old game, while a lot of the citizens are looking around saying, we want to see something different. So that tension is going to drive us for quite a while. Now, one of the folks that are doing really well in all of this are the Islamists. That's why they're on there again. And one of the things I find fascinating about these guys, and I would almost say I respect them to a certain degree, is the people who run Muslim Brotherhood, the people who run Hizb ut-Tahrir, the people who run Al-Qaeda, are in general more intelligent than the people who are running the Canadian government, the British government, the French government. Not only that, I mean, I know how terrible that is to say that. Not only that, they actually have a plan. They have a plan on what they want to do. That plan gives them an objective. Once you have an objective, you say to yourself, okay, that's where I want to get. How do I get there? That's called a strategy. And then you take your strategy and you implement it, and that's called tactics. And they have 20, 30, 40, 50-year plans on how they're going to do this, and they're running those plans. And when they succeed, they say great, and they push ahead really hard. And when they fail, they go, oh well, back up, sit back, try again, and away they go again. So how many people in Canada right now, in any political party, at the municipal, provincial, or federal level, do you think can see beyond the next election? How many of them have an actual objective, an actual strategy? And I mean, it's a problem. But for the Islamists, these guys are actually a lot smarter than we are. A lot smarter than our leaders are. And I think that's going to be kind of an interesting problem. Now, I did start this by saying free speech is kind of what got me into this. And I'm going to tell you why I actually think it's important. Free speech comes out of Europe. It comes out of the Reformation, it comes out of the Renaissance, it comes out of the Enlightenment. And over several hundred years of fighting in Europe, and like huge massacres, wars, people getting killed, whatever, the Europeans came to a kind of a general conclusion that said if we've got a country and we want to run it, and we have disagreements between folks on how we're going to run it, maybe instead of just slaughtering each other until we get to a decision, maybe we should all go sit under a tree somewhere for a while and talk it out. The Magna Carta, i.e. that kind of thing. And then they said maybe we should get representatives together and we should all kind of talk about things. And we eventually came up with a parliament, a place where you can parlay, a place where you can talk. And one of the things that comes out of this, it says, look, if you have disagreements going on in a country, it's best to bring them above ground, talk about them and try and deal with them, rather than force them underground and not talk about them, have people start killing each other in large numbers. So the whole idea that drives free speech is to get a bunch of different opinions into the marketplace of ideas, talk about them, discuss them, what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't, and then kind of push the whole system along. If you get people that want to shut down free speech, communists, fascists, Islamists, globalists, whatever, the reason they don't want you to have free speech is because many of their ideas are not saleable. They won't withstand discussion in the marketplace. Nonetheless, they want to run them. So we need to have free speech silence. Now, like I said earlier, I've been kind of shocked by what I see going on in Canada in the last few years. But this year, something happened to me that just kind of drove me absolutely nuts. Ms. Freeland, our foreign minister, went to the United Nations and she gave a speech. And I forget it exactly, but she said words to the effect that white supremacists, neo-Nazis, incels, nativists, and people who are anti-globalist and willing to use violence are the greatest threat to the security of Canada and to the Western world. And I was just shocked. I mean, I've been in this racket for 40 years. I've done all kinds of work for the RCP, for the military, for the Privy Council office. And I got a pretty good idea who's in Canada, who wants to blow stuff up, who doesn't, who wants to overthrow the government, who doesn't. And I was utterly gobsmacked, to use a British term, that she would say this out loud. And I thought, well, maybe it's just some idiot speechwriter, or maybe it's just Freeland, whatever, I don't know. But the next thing you know, what have we got? We've got Mr. Trudeau repeating the same line, and then we have Mr. Goodale, who I thought was like the adult in the room, actually repeating the same thing. White supremacists are the greatest threat to Canada. Neo-Nazis are the greatest threat to Canada. And I kind of thought, this is just utterly bizarre. So, thought about it for a couple of days, and I said, let's have some fun. Let's dig into this and see how big a threat these guys are. So, for those of you that follow this stuff closely, and for those of you that don't, Public Safety Canada, your ministry, has a website. In this website, there's something called Currently Listed Terrorist Entities. And this 10,500 word document lists 55 different groups that, in the opinion of the professionals of the Government of Canada who run the RCMP and run CSIS and run public safety, they believe that these 55 terrorist groups are a threat to Canada, a threat to Canadians, or a threat to Canadian interests. And that's all they write about. So some guy in Nepal wants to blow up some guy in Kyrgyzstan, we don't care, that's their problem, we don't list them. Some guy in India wants to blow up some guy in Pakistan, that's their thing, we don't care, we don't list them. We only care about the groups who threaten Canada, Canadian interests, or Canadians. So, this 10,500 word document has 55 groups listed as terrorists who are a threat to Canada. So, quick guess, how many of them do you think are white supremacist groups? 0. How many of them are neo-Nazi? Zero. So then I got the old word search thing out, you gotta love computers, and say, how many times does the word white appear in this document? Zero. How many times does the word Nazi appear in the document? Zero. How many times, I thought I had a little fun, how many times does the word Christian appear in the document? Answer, twice. Both times as victims and targets, not as perpetrators, but as groups who are specifically designed to kill Christians. There's a couple of them. So then I thought, all right, let's print this sucker out, because I've got a nice big long table in my basement. Printed the thing out and read the whole document, all 10,500 words. And here's an interesting thought. Out of the 55 groups that are listed by public safety as a threat to Canadian, 40 of them are Islamist in nature. 40 of them specifically identify that they support the theories and ideas of political Islam. So 40 out of 55, or loosely speaking 70%, of the groups that the RCMP and CSIS identify as a potential threat to Canadians are Islamist in orientation. 0 are white supremacist, 0 are neo-Nazi, 0 are incels, and 0 of them are anti-globalist. The only time the word global or globalist appears in the document is global Islamic jihad. It's the only time it appears. So, why that is interesting is for two reasons. One is the narrative around white supremacy and the threat from white supremacy, whatever, is a wholly manufactured narrative. It bears no reality at all. And the people that have been running the government of Canada for years that do all this kind of work in the RCMP, in CSIS, in public safety, have 0 groups listed representing this. So that's kind of a problem. The other thing, though, this is a part about silencing you. Because if you disagree with Mr. Trudeau, or if you disagree with Ms. Freeland, or you disagree with Mr. Goodale, it's because you're a white supremacist, or you're a racist, and you're this and you're that. So, one of the things that frightens me about that is, not only is it a misrepresentation about the actual threat, which is important, but it's also part of a larger narrative to shut down discussion. Now, in terms of silencing free speech, we also have M103, the anti-Islamophobia motion. It was written and produced by this lady here, Ikra Khalid, member of Parliament from Mississauga. Quick background, her father is Jam Islamiyah, one of the world's largest Islamist groups. She announced her decision to run at the ISNA Mosque, the Islamic Society of North America Mosque, which has had 3 charities busted for funding terrorism by the Canada Revenue Agency. So in the opinion of the Government of Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, the mosque she comes from has been involved 3 times in funding terrorism. I'm not saying that's an extremism indicator, but anyway. Now, she herself was a member of something called the Muslim Student Association at York University, and she claimed during the election campaign that she wrote the Constitution. So I thought, fellas should go read that. God love the interweb, you can find all this stuff. So I read this thing, and she is pro-Salafist and pro-Sharia, not surprisingly to me. The dude standing next to her is a really interesting guy. He's head of the Justice Committee, Anthony Housefather. He's a Jew from Montreal. He's a Jew. I got to see this guy. Actually, I was so outraged by the false information he was putting out about me. I said, you're going to meet me. And to his credit, he did. And when I asked him about all this stuff, he said, oh, Ikra Khalid's wonderful. And I said, well, what about the fact that she supports Sharia law? What about the fact she comes from a mosque which funds terrorism, by the way? And one of those groups is Hamas, which is determined to destroy Jews. He supported the motion. He was the seconder. He pushed this thing through Parliament. So I kind of look at it, I'm absolutely gobsmacked by this guy. I'm not too shocked by her because I know this is why she's there. But what's really interesting about M103, if you read the language in M103 about blasphemy and all this kind of stuff, it reads almost exactly like Pakistani blasphemy laws. Guess where her father's from? Guess where she was born? Anyway, so the M103 thing has nothing to do with Islamophobia. It has everything to do with silencing free speech about people who criticize not Islam, because you should be allowed to criticize any political ideology, but the threat is they don't want you to criticize political Islam. And the reason they need to silence you is because what political Islam represents is so absolutely horrific, you could never support it in a public marketplace of ideas. It's homophobic, it is anti-this, it is anti-that, it is misogynistic like crazy, it is anti-democracy, it is anti-human rights, and it literally argues the bit earlier, the Quran is our constitution. So they actually argue that the Quran should take precedence over the Canadian Constitution. which is why you have people go to the Peel Regional Education Council. They refuse to stand for the national anthem, but they demand Muslim prayers in schools. And that's an actual example of the problem. They believe the Quran should take superiority over the Canadian Constitution, but they want us to pay for private prayers in schools. And it's like, wow, this is where we're going. Now, very quickly, moving along, the digital charter. This is not just Mr. Trudeau's thing, this is actually coming out of Europe, and we're just seeing parts of it here. The digital charter sounds all right. It talks about freedom and access to the internet and all this kind of good stuff, but it also says the internet has to be a safe space. People shouldn't have their feelings hurt if they're reading the internet. So what it sets up is a situation, I kid you not, where somebody's looking at something on the internet and they get upset about it and their feelings are hurt. Then they can complain to the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada will go to the ISP, the service provider, or whatever, whoever's owning the servers, and actually fine them or force them to shut the thing down. And it's like, wow. The point of this thing at the end of the day is to create a safe space where no one's feelings are going to get hurt. And of course, at the end of the day, it's about silencing criticism of political ideology, religious groups, etc. Then there's the media buyout we're all familiar with. Mr. Trudeau wants to take $600 million and hand it out. Now, it's not exactly a secret that the mainstream media is suffering. Numbers are down, advertising revenues are down, number of papers they're printing are down. So there's a real struggle to stay alive in that industry. So the theory is, this is bailout money to help the industry convert from sort of an analog paper world to a digital world, which they should have done years ago. But anyway, nonetheless, this is what we're being told. But of course, the people who are the arbitrators, the folks who decide who gets the money and who don't, will be appointed by the Government of Canada. And it's made abundantly clear, and journalists I know tell me this, and you can just see it, that if you kind of support the government, or at least if you're not too critical, your name will float up the list of who gets the $600 million. If your name is not there, you kind of go down and you won't. The problem, of course, is a number of these industries are struggling to stay alive. So if your competitor down the road gets a $10 million bailout, they can afford to operate cheaper and better than you can because they're running on a subsidy, whereas you have to compete for advertising dollars, etc. So you're going to go under first. So CBC already gets $1 billion a year, and now we're going to see other organizations start getting tens of millions of dollars a year. The idea, again, is to drive discussions down certain paths and silence other people. Then there's the issue of lawfare. Folks might have noticed a while ago Mr. Trudeau threatened to sue Mr. Scheer for something he said. And I kind of laughed because this is an Islamist tactic. He knows he can't win the lawsuit. He's never going to run it. But the idea is to silence people by threatening to sue them. So the last time I got sued doing this sort of thing, it took about 4 years and $240,000 to make the problem go away. But Islamists regularly sue newspapers and sue people like myself who speak out because they don't want to hear the message. They don't want you in the public realm. So journalists I know, for instance, tell me they're only allowed to write like one article a month on political Islam because otherwise the Islamists will threaten to sue them. A number of other journalists said they won't even touch the stories anymore because they'll get sued. So these kinds of issues are all combining together to silence free speech in Canada, and it's quite worrying. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go through something here. First off, let's just all agree on something. Politicians lie. Had this problem, the Phoenicians had the problem. Every government that's ever existed in the world has had politicians. At the end of the day, we kind of assume politicians lie about a lot of stuff. It's bad, it shouldn't happen, we'd like something better, but nonetheless, there it is. You know, were you in bed with that girl last night? No, I was not. You know, they're lying, we know it. But something has happened in the last couple of years that startled me, and I'm a cynic. We now have lying as a matter of state policy on national security issues. And it's like, wow, A, that's a hell of a statement to make, and B, it's frightening. So why would I make that statement? And if someone has to testify in court, how would I justify that? So, Richmond Hill arrests in Toronto 4 weeks ago, a couple of folks were arrested, father and son team, put in the car, driven away by the regional police, charged with explosive charges because they had the ingredients for THCP in their house, they had ammonium nitrate, and they had detonators. So they were building bombs in the house. That's why they're arrested. And by the way, Richmond Hill is a pretty nice neighborhood, or you would think it is. So immediately after that, the Minister of Public Safety, the Honourable Ralph Goodale, puts out a statement and said, this had nothing to do with national security, and it was a local police matter. And I was just shocked because, again, it's a direct, obvious, blatant, pre-planned lie. Not the usual lying about, who paid for lunch or whatever, but this is an actual serious event. So, why am I upset? Well, first off, he says it's not a national security matter. Well, just by way of background, the two guys who were arrested, the reason the police found out about them is U.S. Customs and Border refused them to entry to America. They're both born in Iran, and America and Iran right now are just on the edge of having a war, or not. Things are really bad over there. So Iranians leaving Canada, going into America with bomb-making material, that kind of defines a national security event. Because if we have another Canadian that blows up something in America, Mr. Trump might get really angry with us and he might respond. And it's serious stuff. The other thing is, the FBI is involved. CBSA, the Canada Border Security Agency, is involved. CSIS is involved, the RCMP is involved, and the arrest was actually carried out by the police force of jurisdiction, the regional police, York Regional. So, the fact that it is a transnational terrorism investigation that involves multiple federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies means that it is the very definition of a national security event. The fact that all these police forces are involved kind of tells you it's not a local event. This is not some guy got drunk in a bar and punched somebody out and the police dragged him away. This is a major event. So, in and of itself, you might say, okay, well, Ralphie was trying to cover things up, or he's trying to silence criticism, whatever. But here's the issue. Parliament Hill last summer. How many people were aware of the fact there was a vehicle attack on Parliament Hill last summer? Did y'all hear about that? No, you didn't. It wasn't in the press. There's a reason for it. Last summer, on August 18th, late in the evening, a dude in a car is trying to get through the RCMP checkpoint. So any vehicle going up onto Parliament Hill right now, you have to go into this kind of funnel. The RCMP have some gates there, and you have to explain why you're there, where you're going, all that kind of stuff. Buddy gets into the lineup, and he's waiting, and then jumps out of line with his car, runs a couple of people over, chases some woman who's got a baby carriage, and a baby in it, whatever. Some guy grabs her, throws her out of the way, and the guy crunches the car into the wall. They grab him, and they drag him away. That very evening, the statement came out, it's not a threat to public safety. It's not a national security event. And I thought, the guy ran people over with his car. He tried to run another woman over with a baby. That's a threat to public safety. Ask the folks who got run over how they feel about it. The other thing is, Anthony Fury of the Toronto Sun tried to investigate that as a journalist and said, what the heck is going on here? Why did that guy do that? Who is he trying to hit? Who is he trying to kill? Is this just some guy who's just a nutter? In which case, okay, fine, let's just, take him away. Or was he trying to do something? He got told that his asking these questions itself was a problem, and he was threatened as a journalist. Not the first time it's happened to him. A member of Parliament tried to ask the RCMP and said, this is my house. I'm a member of Parliament. This is where I live and work, more or less. I think as a member of Parliament, I should be allowed to know who's trying to run me down. And the RCMP told him none of his business. So, a member of Parliament, when asking a question about an attack that was aimed at Parliament Hill, gets told there's nothing to see, move along, blah, blah, blah. Now, you might recall the Toronto Danforth one. You probably heard about that. Some guy walked down the Danforth in Toronto with a pistol, murdered two young girls who were like 8 and 12 years old, and killed 12 or 14 other people, in an absolute horrific mess. The investigation was finished last December. Y'all read the report? No, it ain't out there. The families were told, and I know this because I'm doing some work for the families, we're told it'll be out in January, February, March, April, May, and now they're being told June. The report still is not out. There's a few interesting questions there. Was the guy trained in Pakistan? Yes or no? Daddy says yes, his mommy says no. Was the guy mentally insane? Daddy says no, mommy says yes. Where did he learn to shoot like that? Oh, the families were literally told by the Toronto Police Force that, oh, he's not really an expert shooter. He probably learned to shoot like that by watching a video game. And I was kind of blown away because I've been around a couple of guns. I was in the military for 15 years. Don't know how many people know, but the military's got a thing with guns. And the military is a real thing with guns about control and precision and care and all this sort of stuff. Real hardcore in this kind of thing. So when I watched this guy on the video pull up the gun, and he starts firing, my first thought is, this guy's done this before. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to handle a gun. It's like going to a local hockey rink. When you see some kid step onto the ice and make a couple of steps, you can tell in the first 2 or 3 steps whether this kid can skate or not. You watch kids going by on skateboards. You see the one guy who's just like, having a drink, playing with his iPhone. You know this guy's expert at what he's doing, and then you watch me on a skateboard, I can't do anything. So that guy with the gun, to my way of thinking, and I showed this to some of my friends who are in special forces, I got another friend who's a pathfinder, and said, what do you think? And everybody says this guy knows how to handle a gun. Not only that, he walked down the Danforth firing a pistol, state of absolute chaos, was able to drop the magazine, reach into a bag, put up another magazine, and keep firing. I don't know if you've ever tried that before. It's actually hard to do in a state of chaos while firing. This guy has handled a firearm before, so where was he trained? No answer, we're not allowed to know that. He had 2 clips from an AK-47 with ammunition in them in his bedroom drawer. And maybe it's just me, but if you have 2 clips of ammunition for an AK-47 rifle, somewhere around here there's an AK-47 rifle, otherwise you wouldn't have this. We're not allowed to ask that question. So that's the Danforth. We're not allowed to ask any of those questions, we're not allowed to know. Don't know if you all know this, Pearson Airport, a couple of weeks ago, a young gentleman, newly arrived Canadian from the religion of peace, was driving a fuel truck at Toronto Pearson. He hit an airplane 3 times.
3 times.
So hard that the passengers in it, some of them were sent to hospital, and the picture came out today, and you can see like the front end of the airplane's all crunched in. And folks sort of thought like, wow, that's important, because I fly through Toronto Pearson on kind of a halfway regular basis. I also worked, in the aviation world, and I know how hard it is for a fuel truck to hit an airplane. Like, it just shouldn't happen. The way things are rigged, that should never happen. Now, human stupidity is what it is. People do stupid things, bad things happen, people get confused. He was listening to his iPod, he poured his coffee in his lap. I don't know, maybe something happened. It happens once, but he hit the airplane 3 times in a row. It's like, I'm sorry, something is going on here. There's either 2 things. One, he was trying to do that, or B, Toronto Pearson is so badly run by stupid people that they're a threat, one or the other. And guess what? You're not allowed to know, nothing to see here, move along. So when you see this happen time after time after time, and I'm just showing 4 examples here, there's about 15 that I'm aware of, it is in fact now a national policy at the federal level to silence discussions around terrorist attacks, perceived terrorist attacks, and even stupid stuff like Toronto Pearson. That doesn't include the Mississauga bombing, doesn't include the thing in Barrie, whatever. Now, I'm actually going to have a little bit of fun here just for a bit. I'm going to look at a few funny things. The United Kingdom, their army has a big new campaign against racism, diversity, inclusivity, and all this good stuff. So, the United Kingdom Army has put a new poster out, and it's how to identify extreme right-wing, or right-wing, what are they called? Extreme right-wingers, that's it. They're looking for extreme right-wingers in the army. And they've decided that the best way to find them is to find people who will self-identify as patriots. So if you self-identify as a patriot now, that is an indicator and warning that you are some sort of extreme right-winger. So I kind of thought, that word patriot, I know it's come up in my daily life somewhere and I can't think where. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love. So next time you all sing the national anthem, you're extreme right-wingers. Remember that. The situation has got so bad that if you identify yourself as a patriot, patriotic, a supporter of national sovereignty of, like, I don't know, Canada, you are now going to get labeled as an extreme right-winger. This is, again, the issue of shutting down sovereignty. It's kind of a globalist sort of thing. Now, Trudeau goes to Quebec. He's in a town hall meeting. A woman stands up and asks him, says, you know, we're seeing rising immigration numbers going 150, 250, 350. And she goes, what is the effective level? What is the proper number? How many people should we be bringing in? And by the way, who's supposed to pay for all this? Trudeau answered her question by saying, your racism has no place here. And it's kind of like, wow, she wasn't asking about whether they're Muslims or Christians or brown or black or white. She just says, how many folks should we be bringing in, especially at a time when we have high unemployment in a lot of places. And then when she pushed the issue, he said, well, she's intolerant. So here we go again. From the leader of the country, from the leader of a major political party, if you ask a question about rising immigration levels, it's because you're racist. Not because he can't answer the question or because there is a right or a wrong answer. It's because you're racist and intolerant. Now, y'all might recognize the fellow in the photo. Back in 2014, when he was a member of Parliament, he gave an interview to something called El Mashrek. It's a newspaper in Montreal. It has a print version, it has an online version. It's printed in Arabic, but it's mostly, strangely enough, a kind of pro-Iran, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah kind of newspaper. So whether you should give an interview to them or not, I don't know, but he did. So fine. He states in the article in 2014, while running for election as Prime Minister, that if he was elected, he would have a special immigration program that was more open to Muslims and Arabs. And I kind of thought, wow, that's interesting. That is identifying people by race and religion and then moving them further up or further down the priorities list. And I'm kind of like, isn't that racist? I don't know. Anyway, then we have Ahmed Hussan, the Minister of Immigration. When he's asked questions about queue jumping at the border, he goes, well, Canadians are divisive, they're fear-mongering, it's not Canadian. He singled out a couple of Canadian MPs and said, you know, they're not really Canadians because they're asking these questions. And I think Mr. Hussan, your boss, actually says he wants an immigration program to be more favorable to Muslims and Arabs coming into the country. Now, you won't find anybody willing to ask these questions in Parliament, and you won't see it in the press very much, but it's actually there. That's the article, that's what it says. That's what we're on about. Now, here's another thing that drives me absolutely insane. Feminists, feminism. This is a feminist, apparently, a self-described feminist, sitting, check this out, head covered, barefoot, at the back of the room. This is the Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, at the Dundas Mosque in Toronto. The Dundas Mosque is run by the Muslim Brotherhood. How do we know that? Because the guy that runs the place, Al-Tansani Atiyah, told the National Post that here we follow the teachings of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's on the public record in the national press as saying this is a Muslim Brotherhood mosque, and he's proud of it. So, Kathleen Wynne goes to speak at the mosque. No problem with that. She's Premier of Ontario, she should go everywhere. But she's sitting at the back of the mosque with her head covered, barefoot, and she has to wait for the men to finish speaking because the women can only speak after the men are done. And I kind of sit there and I go, you know, I'm not a huge fan of Kathleen Wynne, but she's the Premier of Ontario, and I live in Ontario, and I expect the Premier of my province to sit at the front of the friggin' room. And I expect her to speak first. Even if I don't like her, she's still the Premier. She should be speaking first. But where are the feminists on this? A woman who is a self-declared feminist and the Premier of a major province, who cares, minor province, but the Premier of a major province has to sit at the back of the room until the men are done speaking, and she has to be barefoot with her head covered. Like, even in the 1930s, this crap wouldn't have flown. But, because it's Islamist in nature, no one's allowed to criticize it. Can you imagine if she went to, like, a Baptist church somewhere, and they said, yeah, I'll come in and have a seat at the back barefoot with your head covered, and we'll talk to you in a while? Oh my God, I mean, the Baptist church would be closed, and rightfully so. But because it's a Muslim Brotherhood mosque, you can get away with it. Now, here's another funny one. This one is funny, and it's terrifying. Young Mr. Trudeau's in Western Canada. He's at a friendly gathering, a town hall, mostly friendly. A woman gets up and starts asking a question, and she's actually being friendly towards Trudeau. She's a Trudeau supporter. And she's asking the question, and at some point, she made this comment about, you know, what is mankind looking to in the future? And he interjects and says, well, you know, we like to say people kind. And you kind of go, okay, it's Trudeau, whatever. He likes his funny words. And by the way, the rebel media actually looked at it and said they could find the word people kind had been used 9 times in the press in the previous 20 years. In other words, nobody uses the word ever. But anyway, Trudeau criticizes the woman for it, fine, whatever. Now, the next day, the dude with the glasses, Gerard Butts, who's the Prime Minister's lead advisor, he's the man behind the throne, he's the guy behind the curtain, he's the brains of the operation. He actually puts out this statement and says, the lesson to take from this joke being talked by InfoWars and other alt-right Nazi friends of the rebel is they're paying attention. And I'm ex-military, I've seen a concentration camp, I've been to a war, I understand the Holocaust, I know what genocide is, I've helped investigate it for the War Crimes Tribunal. But here's this guy, Gerard Butts, the Prime Minister's advisor, saying, if you make fun of the way the Prime Minister uses, you know, really stupid words, you're a Nazi. You're an actual Nazi just for criticizing the Prime Minister's language. So here again, this to me is a free speech issue. For simply making fun of the Prime Minister when he uses, you know, admittedly really stupid words, you're not being rude, you're not being critical, you're a Nazi. And it's like, again, it's not because you're actually a Nazi, it's an attempt to silence you, to get you frightened, so you're afraid to speak out against it. And that I find really bothersome. Now, this one's actually just kind of funny. Here's Elizabeth May. She's at a parade a couple of weeks ago. It's a big green thing. Everybody's excited about green, carbon tax, and all this. And go team, go. So what's she driving in? A friggin' Dodge Viper V10. For folks who don't follow cars, because I'm a bit of a car nut, the Dodge Viper V10 has, well, a V10 engine in it. It is one of the largest engines in a car in Canada. It is a 512 cubic inch or 8.4 liter engine.
They go.
Yeah. Oh, do they ever?
Oh, do they ever?
Our good friends down at the EPA in America tell us that on a good day, flat and level, wind at its back, everything else, it gets 12 miles to the gallon. So this to me, once again, is kind of, you know, it's kind of funny, whatever, but it sort of suggests everything that's wrong with Canadian politics right now. You're bad people because you don't want to pay the carbon tax. You're bad people because you have gasoline cars. You're bad people because you got diesel tractors. And you really should have like tractors towed by unicorns or something. But here's Elizabeth May going to a parade and she's sitting in a friggin' Dodge Viper V10. I would have more patience and tolerance for her if she was in a Tesla. That I wouldn't have so much trouble with. But the fact that she drives around in a V10 while criticizing us, the fact that Mr. Trudeau flies coast to coast in a Challenger jet, and private jets, by the way, are like the least efficient way of moving people around in terms of burning fuel. It's the sheer hypocrisy that drives me nuts. But yet when I speak out, I'm a racist, I'm Islamophobic, I'm a Nazi, I'm alt-right, whatever, but yet they can do this. And it just, I think it's that kind of hypocrisy that's really driving Canadian nuts, or at least it's driving me nuts anyway. So, enough of the negativity, enough of the rants. Let's look at some positive news. Is there anything good going on in the world right now? And the answer is yeah. In the last 6 months to a year, I've been pleasantly startled by a bunch of really cool things happening. Germany, as well as France, Sweden, United Kingdom, have something called no-go zones. I was in the Netherlands and Denmark in 2007 as a guest of federal level police, and they showed me no-go zones. A no-go zone is a place in a town where the police won't go. They won't go there because they're going to get shot at, stabbed, rocks thrown at their cars, they get smashed, whatever. So they only go into specific areas of town if they move in force, if they have permission ahead of time, if the deputy chief of police gives them permission to go in there. So there are certain neighborhoods that are so bad, they just don't go there. No-go zone. These things are kind of all over the place. Now, I've written about them, other people have written about them, and for my efforts I got called Islamophobic, neo-Nazi, right-wing, extremist, blah, 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 whatever. And this has been going on for years. But just late last year, in Germany, Chancellor Merkel, Mama Merkel, the head of Germany, who is the absolute darling of the left. She is the darling of the progressives. She actually stood up in a speech and said, no-go zones are a problem in Germany. There's places where the constitution of the government of Germany doesn't apply, and we need to fix this problem. Now, what was shocking there is not the truth. I mean, it happens, everybody knows it. What is truly shocking is the Chancellor of Germany said out loud in public that no-go zones exist, and everybody in Germany knows they exist for two reasons: Islamists and criminal gangs from the Middle East. So that was actually positive that it's out there. It's in the news, and now it's a real thing. And now when I write about it, I notice all the wankos from like King's College in London don't call me racist and Islamophobic anymore because I'm on the same page as Angela Merkel. Now, even more fascinating, about 3 weeks ago, Germany and their lead intelligence service, and their intelligence service in Germany is called the Office for the Protection of the Constitution. Kind of an Orwellian name, but whatever. So they put out a paper, and it said, the rising wave of anti-Semitism in Germany is not caused by right-wing neo-Nazis. It's being caused by political Islam. And again, not that it's not true, not that we don't know that, but what is shocking is the German government allowed a document to be published out there where everybody can see it that says the problems in Germany are being caused by political Islam. What's really shocking about this is A, it's the Germans, and you might recall your history, the Germans and the Jews have kind of a very unhappy history, you know, Holocaust and all that. But the Germans actually had the guts to stand up and say this, and they're the first intelligence agency in Europe to say it. So a real good piece of news now, that there's a major intelligence agency run by a serious country that is aware of the problem, and they say political Islam is causing it. Now, some of you might have heard of a guy named President Macron of France. Not perceived as a strong leader. He's got that whole yellow vest thing trying to throw him out of government, whatever. France has a little interesting exercise going on right now. It's called the Grand Dialogue. There's this huge debate going on in France about the future of France, the future of politics, the future of taxation, the future of education, the future of laïcité, fraternité, and all this good stuff. So President Macron is at a press conference about this, and he's standing behind a kind of podium like this, and he's got a microphone, and the cameras are on, and somebody asks him, and he says, look, political Islam is trying to secede from the Republic. So he actually admits that the Muslim Brotherhood, that is to say political Islam, is trying to separate their little mini caliphates from the rest of France. And it's like, wow, the president of France just said political Islam is trying to break up the French Republic. And then he said something else which is absolutely stunning to me. He said, this is a political project disguised as a religion. And it's like, yes, that's exactly the point. The Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamists, this is not a faith, this is a political project run with the shield of religion around it. That's why you're not allowed to criticize it. But for the president of France to stand up and say political Islam is trying to destroy the country on the public record, it's like, wow, that's the first time anybody in Europe said that. Now, next door in the Netherlands, the AIVD, the Dutch Intelligence Service, and it's got a name kind of like that, and it's in Dutch, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to say it. But the AIVD came out and said, the education system in the Netherlands has got to such a point that the Islamists have infiltrated both the public schools and the private schools, and they are teaching the youth to segregate themselves, to isolate themselves from society to a point where the Dutch Intelligence Agency assesses this is a threat to the national security of the Netherlands. This is a threat to the continuing existence of the Dutch state. Again, not that it's not happening, everybody knows it, but the government's gone on record as saying it's a problem. Now, to the south of here, we have the United States of America. The White House under Mr. Trump has announced a kind of vague policy, which Trump kind of always starts that way, but he says he wants to start looking at the Muslim Brotherhood, and he's seriously interested about listing it or some of its front groups as terrorist groups, so they won't be allowed to operate in America anymore. And I kind of go like, wow, the Americans are actually waking up to the problem. They know it's a problem. The FBI has known this for years. The CIA has known it for years. But finally, we have an American administration that is at least willing to take the idea and put it up on a table. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't know where it's going to go. But at least they're willing to talk about it. Now, looking across Canada here, I've seen a whole bunch of nothing. I've seen absolutely nothing in Canada so far that mimics the rest of this. So our European colleagues and a whole bunch of other countries, including Poland and Hungary and the Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic, and even the Swedish government is finally admitting there's an issue. All of these European countries are saying, look, political Islam is a problem, and we got to do something. Now, they don't know what they want to do, they don't know how they're going to do it, but it's like any other problem. If you won't talk about the problem, you can't solve it. Why do those folks go to AA and say, hi, my name's such and such, I'm an alcoholic? Well, in order to solve the problem, you have to say there is a problem. So our European colleagues and our American colleagues are saying there is a problem. Our Canadian leadership and all the mainstream parties, to the best of my knowledge, are not only not addressing the issue, if you try and touch them with it, they run away. So, like I said, there's a whole lot of positive information out there, and I think it's going to eventually get here. And I'm hoping it's going to get here sooner rather than later. And I'm thinking sooner rather than later might mean something like, I don't know, apparently there's an election this fall. I think we might get it out before then, at least I'm hoping. Now, Operation Killswitch. What am I babbling about here? What's this all about? Well, last fall, in early October, I sent a fairly thick report to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, signed by myself, who's a former intelligence contractor for the RCMP, and I testified in Criminal Court of Canada as a court expert on jihadist terrorism for the RCMP, so they kind of know who I am. It was co-signed by Tahir Gora, a Muslim guy I know in Mississauga, who's a brilliant guy and has got very good ideas of what's going on in this world. Also by Rahil Reza, Sohail Reza, and by Benjamin. So we all signed this thing, sent it off to the RCMP, and 3 hours later, I got a report that said, thanks for your email. And then silence, absolute silence. But lo and behold, 3 weeks later, I got another thing from the Office of the Commissioner of the RCMP that said, we've got your report, we've read it, and we forwarded it to the appropriate business line for investigation. And what really stunned me about the thing is there was a file number at the bottom. So the RCMP has an actual file number, which means there's a criminal investigation open into the report I sent them. Now, what was in this wonderful report? I kind of looked around and said, hey, you know what? Members of the Government of Canada, Mr. Trudeau, Ms. Freeland, Mr. Hussan, Omar Algebra, Ikra Khalid, Mary-Claude Bibeau, are taking taxpayer dollars, your taxpayers' money, and they are giving it to Islamic Relief Canada through a variety of different programs. And it's millions of dollars, millions and millions and millions of dollars. Islamic Relief Canada is a federally registered charity according to the CRA, so they are forced by law to publish financial statements every year. So I looked at their financial statements over a period of several years, and they send millions of dollars every year to something called Islamic Relief Worldwide, which is their parent organization in the United Kingdom. So what am I saying? I'm saying, well, here's Tom Quiggin, and I'm saying, according to Government of Canada documents put out by the Government of Canada, they're sending money to Islamic Relief Canada. Islamic Relief Canada, in accordance with the law in Canada, is putting out financial statements to say they're shipping money off to Islamic Relief Worldwide. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Islamic Relief Worldwide has been listed as a terrorist group by the United Arab Emirates, and they say Islamic Relief Worldwide is part of a larger Muslim Brotherhood organization designed to fund Hamas. So, according to the government of the United Arab Emirates, Canadian taxpayers are funding Hamas. Now, according to the government of Israel, they say the same thing. Your money is going to fund Hamas. And when the Israelis and the Emiratis, so you've got the Jewish state over here, and you've got the Sunni Muslim Arab state over here, when they agree on something, that's when you really kind of have to take a look and say, what's going on here? Not only that, the government of Bangladesh said Islamic Relief Worldwide is not allowed in our country because they fund extremism. Now, HSBC, one of the world's top 10 largest banks, has cut off Islamic Relief Worldwide and said, we don't trust these guys anymore because they're funding terrorism, and we don't want our bank's accounts to be used to funding terrorism. You might have heard of another bank, it's a really weird one, UBS. It's a very rich, very powerful Swiss bank, but they kind of don't advertise a lot who they are because they're Swiss. They actually came out and said, we don't deal with Islamic Relief Worldwide because they're funding terrorism. And in the United Kingdom, the Charities Watch said that of the 4,000 charities they have in the United Kingdom that are listed to Muslim groups, they're going to ban one. One group out of 4,000 they banned, and that's Islamic Relief Worldwide. And the Financial Post here in Canada said Islamic Relief Canada came off their most favored list because terrorism funding concerns. So all I pointed out in the report was that members of the Government of Canada are giving money to a group. They know it's going down a path where it will fund terrorism. And by the way, the Criminal Code of Canada says that's illegal, Section 8304, etc., etc. So, and like I said, the RCMP actually opened a criminal file on this, which I thought great. Now, the next thing I've got is another lawsuit. This time I'm being sued by Islamic Relief Canada for libel, because I've somehow inferred that they're dealing with terrorists. And it's kind of like, well, you people say you're sending money to Islamic Relief Worldwide. The banks and the financial agencies of the government say they're terrorists, not me. I didn't say it, it's those people saying it. Nonetheless, we're trapped in another lawsuit. It's ongoing, but we've decided to do something different this time. Rather than all the newspapers in Canada that remain silent when they're sued by these groups and they just pay them off to get out of it, rather than other individuals in Canada have been sued like this, and unlike myself last time who remained silent, we said this time, let's do something different. Let's turn this around and let's go after these people. Let's not only admit that it's happening, let's publish it. Let's tell people what's going on. So the whole idea behind this is to just say, look, let's take this from under the table, put it on top of the table where everybody can see it. Now, something else really interesting has happened, and I'm in a really positive mood because of this. There's something out there called the Qatar Papers. And I'm going to ask you, if you forget my name, if you forget you were here, if you remember absolutely nothing about this a week from now, remember these two words, Qatar Papers. Now, why should you care? There's a country in the Middle East called Qatar, or Qatar if you wish. It is this tiny little country about the size of your thumb. It has a national population of 223,000 people, so it's kind of like the size of Saskatoon almost in terms of population. and it's got 3 million expats to do all the work. They are the richest country in the world because they sit on a gazillion cubic meters of natural gas, which they're pumping out like crazy. They make the Saudis look poor. Seriously. Qatar is so rich, they look down their noses at Saudi Arabia. That's how rich they are. Now, Qatar has been, over the last several years, identified as funding ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and the Muslim Brotherhood. This is generally known as public documents. It's all out there. It's all very clear. But something funny has just happened. Somebody living in Qatar, working for Qatar Charity, which is the organization that does all the so-called charitable work, that ships money around the world to fund ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Somebody thought it would be all good fun to go in and download several thousand documents from Qatar Charity showing who gets the money, who applied for the money, what's the bank account number, what's the SWIFT code number, who approved the spending, where did the money go, and all this sort of stuff. So, to make a very long story short, I got contacted by somebody who I kind of vaguely know from years gone by in the intelligence world, said, we want to send you the Qatar papers as they apply to Canada only. Not France, not Germany, not Belgium, none of that. But they want to send these things to me. And they asked, do I want them? And I said, well, hell yeah. So I've got the only copy of the Qatar papers in Canada. A book was just published in French called Qatar Papers, surprisingly enough, and it details in great detail how the Qatari government is funding the Muslim Brotherhood, guys like Tariq Ramadan, how they bought off French politicians, how French politicians have remained silent while all of this is going on. Now, here's the part you should kind of care about. Like, who cares about Qatar? Who cares about intelligence leaks? But here's the part you might want to care about. The Qatar papers list 8 projects in Canada which are being funded, and by funded I mean $900,000, $3.1 million, $2.87 million. It's dollars. And some of the projects in Canada are mosques and cultural centers and stuff that you will have heard of. But here's the fun part. Here's the part I love. When I got these things and I started sorting through them, and most of them are in Arabic, so it takes a long time to read them because you've got to translate them and all this. Some of them are in English. What did I find? 9 Canadian politicians' names are in these things. Why are their names there? They're there because they wrote letters of support for the 8 projects that are getting millions of dollars to spread the word of the Muslim Brotherhood here in Canada. And some of those names, let me tell you, you're going to know them. You'll have heard of them. People right across Canada will know the names. Now, oh yeah, and by the way, just for fun, as a little teaser, I'll throw this out. One of them is currently a serving federal cabinet minister. So that's going to get quite interesting as we start to expose these folks and show why, and ask them the question, why are you supporting groups who take millions of dollars to create Islamic extremism in Canada? Also involved in this, the names of the CBC and the Toronto Star are not actually in the documents, but Al Jazeera is. Al Jazeera is the state media of Qatar, and their mission is to support the Muslim Brotherhood project around the world. Now, y'all might remember there was a CBC documentary out a while ago on Ahmed Syed Khader and on the guy that lives next door in Alberta, Omar Khader, and his $10.5 million, and it was a total soft sell. Guess who helped fund CBC and the Toronto Star in that to write that story? This stuff. This is where it's coming from. So you wonder sometimes, why do the CBC and Toronto Star write stories that are so soft on terrorism? Part of the answer is they're taking foreign money from the government of Qatar to produce that. So that's going to be coming out. Now, one little fun thing I'll tell you, that one of the organizations in Toronto is being funded, and this is millions of dollars, has a founder and a leader who wrote a 46-page document on what he does in Canada and why he does it. In this document, he specifically says he's here in Canada to do jihad. And by jihad, he means destroying Canadian institutions and ensuring they are being replaced by proper Islamic institutions. Interesting enough, he is not well known in Canada, but he's well known in Europe and Middle East because he's a negotiator. So when ISIS and Al-Qaeda were starting to get into a struggle with each other over whose ideology is correct and whether you can kill how many people and all that, the guy that went over to negotiate between them to try and make peace between Al-Qaeda and ISIS lives in Toronto. He's being paid by the state of Qatar to advance this kind of ideology. And this is the kind of thing we want started getting out. And just as another interesting little thought, his son is in jail on terrorism charges. During the trial, the question was raised that the son went to the father. And the son goes to his father and he says, "Father, we want to set off this great big bomb. Is this Islamically correct? Is this the right thing to do?" And the father says, "Yes, my son, this is correct. Go ahead and blow it up in Toronto." And then the son says something really interesting. It shows the son had some decency anyway. He said, "Father, some of the people that die in this may be innocent civilians who have nothing to do with what's going on." And the father's response was, "It's their fate to be there. Killing them is okay." So, this guy has a letter of support from a Canadian politician so they can bring millions of dollars into Canada to spread the word of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, one little hang-up in all of this is the folks that control and own the paper have told me I can have them, I can talk about them, but they don't want me to start sharing them until they're ready to release the rest of them in some other countries, Denmark, Netherlands, America, etc. So sometime either in the end of June or the end of August, I've been told they're going to allow me to release them. So what we're going to do is the Quiggin Report podcast. We'll have a couple of announcements where I'll explain who the 8 projects are, who the 9 politicians are, and what they are. Tag TV in Toronto has already agreed they're going to do a 7 episodes on the Quiggin Report and the Qatar papers. So we'll do 7 30-minute TV programs explaining who these guys are, what they're up to, where the money's going, and who the Canadian politicians are that have been involved in taking the money. We're also going to do, in total fairness to the politicians, we're going to send this information ahead of time and ask them, when you signed these letters, did you know you were supporting Islamic extremism in Canada, specifically the Muslim Brotherhood? And I guess most of them will say no. Maybe they didn't know, maybe they did, but clearly they'll say no now. But we're also going to ask them, and this is what we want folks like you to do, we want you to ask them, would you sign the letter again tomorrow? Will you withdraw your support for this organization? And given that one of them is a federal cabinet minister, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So this is part of why we're doing this now. We want to get this word out. We're going to start telling people that this summer and this fall is going to be really, really interesting. And there's a lot of good stuff coming. Now, that sort of ends sort of like the major information part of what I want to talk about. But the question I always get is, well, Tom, what can I do? I can't do anything. I don't understand, how can we make the government become different? And the answer is, let me tell you something clearly. Politicians don't care about you. They don't care about your tax burden. They don't care about your kid. They don't care about your car. They don't care about the hockey league. They don't care about anything. Politicians care about 2 things really clearly: votes and money. And they really only think about money in as much as it gets them votes. So at the end of the day, they only really care about votes. So the trick in all of this is to impress upon the politician that you're not happy and that you might vote for the other folks if you don't get some answers. So we would like you to do something. Take a picture of the screen, write it down, do it right now. Take your cell phone out and actually send a very quick email message to Prime Minister Trudeau, pm@pm.gc.ca. Simple as that. You might want to do the same thing to Andrew Scheer, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Maxime Bernier, also a Member of Parliament, Party Leader, there's his thing. And find your local Member of Parliament, find your local mayor, find your local MLA, whatever, and send them a very short, very polite message through email that says, we don't want the Muslim Brotherhood in Canada. And I can tell you when they get the first one, and we know what's happened, they're already getting it, they won't care. They get the second one, they won't care. They get 3 of them, 10 of them, they won't care. When they start getting them from a number of folks in a number of different areas, they're going to start to care. And when the Qatar papers come out and we're able to identify specific Canadian politicians who've been supporting millions of dollars coming into Canada to support the Muslim Brotherhood, then I think they're going to start to care. And because there's an election coming, and because the politicians refuse to deal with this issue, I think they're actually going to start to care. So remember I said our European friends are starting to deal with this? The reason they're dealing with this, the reason they're talking about it, is the citizens are forced to do it. The Germans are angry because of the rape crisis they have in the country, the collapse of their healthcare system, and the huge payments they're making. The French are complaining because of violence in the streets, terrorism, whatever. The Brits are complaining because of the Ariana Grande concert being blown up. And I think Canadians need to start complaining in order to get a rise out of our politicians. So if the Europeans can do it, the Americans can do it, I think we can do it. I think there's a really positive moment in time here where we can get this kind of stuff up onto the public radar. And I think what we need to do is go to individual politicians and just say, you know, do you support extremist Islam in Canada? Now, something I've had discussions with folks in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, down the Gaspé in Quebec, in Ontario, and just over the last week in Alberta, we say, look, there's an election coming. And it's pretty clear what the issues are going to be. One is the economy. That one's easy. That's important in every election. The second one's the carbon tax. That has turned into sort of a provinces versus the feds kind of issue, and that will be a federal election issue. Another issue is going to be Mr. Trudeau's performance as Prime Minister. And given that he's been a sitting Prime Minister for the last 4 years, totally reasonable that his performance is discussed in the election. But the fourth issue I really genuinely believe is out there, and I get this right across the country, is this whole issue of radical Islam in Canada, extremist Islam in Canada, terrorism in Canada, and its larger connection to the world around us. Now, we're not allowed to talk about that because political correctness and postmodernism and et cetera, et cetera. But we're starting to see the code words being used. National security, migration, border control, crime. These kinds of things are increasingly being discussed. People know about it, people are angry. And I genuinely believe that right now is the time to start getting this stuff out, to start getting people to start talking about it. With the election coming, I think we need to force the leaders to answer a question: do you support radical Islam in Canada, yes or no? Now, just by way of quick background, a little plug for myself here and my friends. We put a book out last year called Submission: The Danger of Political Islam to Canada. It's actually selling very well in the United States. Much to my surprise, we're making a lot of money down there. Not so good up here, but it is getting better up here. It was written by myself, written by Tahir Gora, who's a Sufi Muslim from Mississauga who warned about political entryism. It's written with me by Saeed Chouaib, who's an Egyptian guy who's here in Canada because the Muslim Brotherhood threatened to kill him. It's written by Jonathan Kotler, a lawyer out of Montreal. Interesting guy. His old man is a guy by the name of Erwin Kotler, liberal cabinet minister who's big into human rights. And it kind of demonstrates this is not a partisan issue. This goes right across all parties, across all issues. And written by Rick Gill, ex-military buddy of mine, who's one of the world's experts on information security, information reliability, intelligence reliability. Lives here in Edmonton now. And the whole thing at the forward written by Rahil Reza, who is the head of Muslims Facing Tomorrow. She's a Pakistani Sunni Muslim woman who really likes to speak out on these issues. So all of this to show people say, well, you know, you're Islamophobic, you're right-wing, you're whatever. You go, yeah, here's my right-wing buddies. Tahir Gora, Saeed Chouaib, Jonathan Kotler is the son of the Liberal cabinet minister, and a Pakistani Sunni woman. So, Operation Killswitch, we've decided to go public with this and have some fun, to actually push this into the face of Islamic relief and push it into the face of the government, and we've been having a lot of success with this. So we started a GoFundMe page. It's called Operation Killswitch. We've got two plans for this. One is to actually pay for the lawsuit, which we're doing. We're actually keeping our bills up there. And the other thing is to do more research into what's actually going on here in Canada right now with these kinds of problems. And much to our surprise, we're off to a very good start. The folks that run the GoFundMe page tell me we're almost on the same trajectory as Admiral Mark Norman when he started. We've got a ways to go yet. He was going for a couple of years. But it's actually going really good. So we would like you to either donate money if you can. Like $5 is great. $1 million would be great. Any amount of money is great. But more importantly, even if you don't want to donate, go onto the site and enter a comment that says you like it or it's good or whatever. Because these are the kinds of things the government watch. This is what Islamic Relief is watching. And one of the things that terrified the Liberal government into finally doing something about Admiral Norman was when he suddenly got popular and he got $400,000 in his GoFundMe account, the government realized the time was up and they got to deal with Mark Norman. So anyway, that is at this point sort of the end of the discussion about information and whatever. And at this point, I'll sort of turn it over to a Q&A thing. So if anybody's got a question, a comment, an idea, or whatever, then by all means now is a sort of a good time to jump up and go.